Welcome to Shooting VR for Post, presented by International Cinematographers Guild, with Dane Brem, Digital Imaging Technician, IMAX, Andrew Cochran, Director, The AV Club Productions, Eve Cohen, Director of Photography, Evan Pessis, Partner, The Astronauts Guild, Andrew Shulkind, Co-founder, Headcase VR, and Michael Chambliss, Technologist, ICG.
Hello, welcome everybody, and I appreciate it's late in the day, and we totally appreciate folks sticking around. It's, a 5:30 start time, wow, especially on a Friday. But anyhow, we're here to talk about the relationship between shooting and post-production in virtual reality. And let's see here if I can get back to my notes. Maybe not. Let's see here just a second, because, oh no. Oh man, I may have to turn over to paper here because I'm getting bagged by my notebook. Let's see here. All right. I don't even know where all that stuff.
Hi guys, how you all doing today? I'm Dane Brem, this is Andrew, Evan, and this is Eve. So I know you guys are also, looking forward to being done with your day, and I know you want to learn. And we're going to assume that most of you guys, for the most part, understand kind of the basic principles of VR, and really the questions that you may have are ones that more to do with what makes, the International Cinematographers Guild, each one of us, a unique craftsman, and what we bring kind of to the level versus a novice versus intermediate user, and what kind of like a professional really would approach it. I mean, most of these are three fine DPs right here, fantastic people. They're probably the most knowledgeable people in Los Angeles, as far as I know, for virtual reality, and I've worked with all of them. But I hope you guys enjoy yourselves, and please be patient and let us know if you have any questions. If you have anything else after this, please find us outside. We'd love to talk and chat, exchange cards, whatever it may be. Thank you.
There we go. So anyhow, you were just hearing from Dane Brem. Dane's a DIT who you've seen his work across scores of TV series, including episodes of Criminal Minds, 90210, Better Call Saul, Pretty Little Liars, and Inhumans. And he's been part of the camera team on films like Transformers, Dark of the Moon, and The Amazing Spider-Man. His work's given him a unique perspective into the workflow challenges of array cameras. His VR clients include Alcatel, the Golden State Warriors, Zolando, Marlboro, IMAX, and Legendary Entertainment. On the far end is Eve Cohen, and she's a cinematographer who shoots independent feature films, TV series, documentaries, and most recently, the cinematic virtual reality content. Her VR credits include the short film The Visitor, which screened at Slam Dance and other festivals. Her 2D credits include episodes in season 4 and 5 of the documentary series Vice for HBO, the TV series 3 Days to Live, and independent feature films including Be Somebody, distributed by Paramount, and Like Water. We have a panelist who is not here right now, Andrew Cochran. And he's a director and a technical advisor. He's also a father-in-waiting, and his wife was on the way to the hospital, so he's making that choice instead of this choice.
That's not
Fully
reality.
immersive
Reality, not virtual
content.
reality.
That's right. Yeah, that's reality. Evan is a cinematographer and a partner at the Astronauts Guild, and which is an advanced technology filmmaking company focused on VR. Evan's VR credits include branded content for Chevrolet, the NFL, Intel, and Kawasaki, along with numerous music videos, concerts, and experimental shorts. Evan also shoots traditional flat screen content, and his 2D credits include the recent TV movie Meet, and One Night Standoff, as well as music videos and commercials, where he specializes in high-speed, underwater, and stereoscopic capture. And right next to me is Andrew Shulkind. He's an award-winning cinematographer who shoots feature films, commercials, and 360 VR productions. He's also developed innovative technology to tell stories in new ways. Andrew's VR credits include The Strain, which is a Comic-Con experience, the interactive episodic series Gone, which also ran at Sundance, not part of Sundance, but it was part of one of the exhibits there, the short film Waves, and numerous promotions for the Olympics, Facebook, Google, Chevrolet, and other leading companies. Andrew designed and helped fabricate one of the highest resolution capture devices for Cinematographic 360 VR. His feature film credits include The Ritual, The Vault, Southbound, and the TV film Washed Up. So let's see here. Let me find my little remote and see what they're going to do here. That's us. Okay, in VR, there is no VR until the pieces are assembled, and that's why we're talking about shooting VR into post. And that goes with the following thought, which means that small cuts in prep can cause hemorrhaging in post-production. And this is it's a significant issue. The cost of post, we were just talking about it in the background, backstage here, where post-production, and you know, when you say, gee, I'm going to do VR, what is post going to cost me? Well, it's going to be between $10,000 a minute and $100,000 a minute. And that's a huge range. And so all of a sudden, the integration of all of the pieces that go into VR. VR is, it's the fusion of production design, creative execution, and capture technology. And depending upon the demands of the creative and the things that you have to put together, there can be a huge variation in post. And so what we're talking about here is we're talking about using the lessons from traditional filmmaking, plus the experiences in VR, to be able to address having a smooth and under control post-production experience, which translates into having a smooth and under control production experience overall. So, you know, to toss the first question out to the panel, how is prep different for VR than flat screen production?
Ladies first.
Dane. Really? You don't want me to say? You like to talk?
No, you go first.
Okay. I would say there's a lot of elements that are different, but because my background is also in 2D filmmaking and standard filmmaking, I think prep is essential to anything that you're going to do. It's just more intense when it comes to VR, and I think there's more elements that you have to test. So the cameras, there's more things that have to happen with them, so the test and the prep just can involve more people and more time.
Okay, well, let me go into the concept of testing. Now, what do we mean by testing, and what are you looking for in the testing, et cetera?
For me, one of the most important, testing is a pivotal step. I think unlike in the 2D world, just to draft off that before directly answering your question, I think what typically you're going to rent an Alexa, you're going to rent a Red, you're going to rent whatever camera you're going to use. You know it's going to work. You're testing to make sure that you have voltage. You're testing to make sure that your lenses are coming up correctly, that you can trust focus and that kind of stuff, making sure all the pieces fit together. In the VR space, whether you're shooting with a camera array or you're shooting nodally, you need to make sure that you can stitch that image, which requires a lot of back-end heavy lifting. So just to the core point of the panel, it's all about how it works in post. We're always thinking about post from the get-go, and prep for me always involves someone on the post end, wherever that, the first question is, where is this posting? Because if you haven't thought about that, you can't look at it in the same traditional way. You really need to know that each camera system is stitchable, because you could get there and not have something that's workable on the back end. And a misalignment of a camera could prove huge, as you say, hemorrhaging. That could be impossible to stitch. So Then when you get into the stitching process, there's, besides all the normal things to make sure that cameras are working and that everything's kind of functioning properly, you're testing gen lock, and you're testing to make sure that you have sufficient overlap, and you're testing to make sure that, kind of understand what the parameters are of the rig. And for me, the most important parameter is how close can you get to camera, because in a lot of these, if there isn't sufficient overlap, or depending on where the overlap is, you may not be able to come closer than 5 or 6 feet, which is a big deal.
And these things, it looks like.
I was just going to say that, just to jump off on that, I think one of the most important things when going into a VR project is understanding immediately who is doing the post. And I think sometimes in traditional filmmaking, it's kind of, we don't necessarily know who's doing the post yet. You get into a project and you're sort of planning for post, but you don't really know exactly where it's going to end up or how you're going to do it. And I think there's this general consensus in 2D filmmaking, traditional filmmaking, is, if we make a mistake, post can fix it. But the key, I think, in VR is that the choices we make determine post. And the choices that we make on set and make in planning is important. And having like a very good communication with post early on is really the key to a successful project, but also the key to a more budgetary friendly project.
I mean, just one more thought about that. I mean, this is a really key issue. I mean, not only in prep, but even on the job. Like, if you shoot too close to a chain link fence, the shot's done. It's garbage. Like, that end of that part of the shot will not stitch if you're too close. So it's about understanding that, okay, maybe we have to plate that, maybe we have to move away, and if we just move a couple of feet away, that could make the difference between the shot working and the shot not working in a distracting way.
So how do you surround this process? What are some of the questions that you ask up front, and what are your interactions? A part B to that, what are your interactions with, like, the VFX supervisor?
I think there's an insane amount of overlap. I find there's an insane amount of overlap with the visual effects supervisor, more than in any other space. And I've had to kind of get on board, and they've had to get on board with kind of each other's roles. There's a lot of feathering. And I think in this space, we all sort of have to be generalists and understand the bigger picture about how all the pieces fit together in a way, as Evan said, that you can kind of disavow it and it'll get solved in post. Like, that just doesn't work here.
And I think the also thing is to kind of go the other direction too, is that, like, it is our job to say, okay, we understand that 2 inches lower becomes a visual effects shot because of proximity, but the point of view of what we're trying to put the audience into is more important than that. So we must get a plate here and understand that maybe this is going to be less technically perfect in the direction we're not looking, but the most important perspective of the viewer matters more than that. And that's sort of where you can't let the technical people that we all rely on determine also the choices we make as a creative,
So how does this process work up front? In other words, prep here is a little different than, gee, what's the schedule, what's the budget, how many pages are we trying to turn in a day, et cetera. It's a much more elaborate kind of process. And so who should be in those discussions? When do those discussions begin?
I'll speak about this one a little bit, only because in VR, at least from my experience, in some cases, I might be called completely independently of the cinematographer, maybe at first in mind to have present an idea of what we might need or what it is. And all at the same time, they're bringing in a cinematographer who's putting a look together, that's creating it, that's lighting, and that's making that experience with the director. And then they will turn to me and say, okay, we have very smart DPs, obviously, but they may turn to me and say, how much is this going to cost? How many hard drives? What kind of data handling? Can you turn this around? In some cases, with some of the current available technologies, we need a very powerful computer just to deliver the project to post, not even just for post to begin working. And in a modern era, especially in digital photography, we're converting a lot of stuff, transcoding in most cases, from one format to the next, and kind of passing it all on and delivering for each one of the respective users. Visual effects being, they need high quality, full frame image, of every single eye or camera or array or whatever it may be. And then on another rig, we may have something where the software is completely different to deliver that. Because a lot of these projects now, we're using 3, 4, 5 different rigs to achieve the goal, but also to, put the right camera in the right spot, use the right tool for the right shot, experience, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're all trying to slam that into one timeline for editorial, you have to help inform that as well. So I think a lot of that has to do with like just delivering it. It can be a whole nother deal just in itself. And it may be a conversation between myself, the DP, the visual effects supervisor, the producer, the director. I mean, this is a collaborative art, but there's even more collaboration, I think, in VR than there is even in normal production, because the level of communication has to be slightly higher level, because the technical accuracy has to be much higher than it would traditionally be.
Yeah, no, I go ahead, Eve.
Just off of that, Dane, I think one thing that you mentioned is really important is that a lot of the conversations for me start with budget, and I don't usually have I'm not usually involved in budget conversations necessarily on traditional filmmaking projects, whereas in VR, it is a lot of making sure everyone is aware of what you're able to achieve with what amount of budget. And I think there's a level of managing the expectation of what you can actually get, and that it might not be achievable on just one kind of rig, like you're saying. And I really look at every array as if it's a lens, and that is the lens. And I'm not going to show up on one shoot with one kind of lens for one project. I mean, that could be a fun challenge for something, but a lot of times we do show up with 3 or 4 or 5 different arrays, because they're each a different lens that's going to give you a different viewpoint and going to translate the story the exact way that you need to tell it. And right now there isn't one array out there that's going to be able to achieve everything that you need. So the conversation has to start really early with how much do you need to achieve the thing. And sometimes the thing that you're trying to achieve is actually much smaller than they think it is. And you can actually get away with a lot less. So that becomes a different conversation of saying, no, this is actually exactly the right thing that you need to have, and trust the team that you're hiring and get everyone in the room so that we can all have the conversation ahead of time. How are we going to start with this and get all the way through to post successfully without these hiccups and everything?
Those things. To move on, I'm going to toss over to Dane. You did a project, and let's see here. Oops, I pressed the red button and not the green button. This is a flat screen version, and feel free to describe.
So this is a project we did for Zalando, which is a fashion, they're kind of like an Amazon in Germany. So the client, this is actually the 2D version of what we did. This is actually shot by Todd Benzal. And so this is a little bit, this is not necessarily 3D, but you kind of get a good sense of the kind of sets and work that we had in front of us. So for this particular thing, we had both a 2D unit, and this is like this is modern VR filmmaking, at least for me. A lot of the times I don't get a dedicated set, dedicated project, 100% dedicated to me. I'm sharing it with a 2D crew. I might also do photography as well. I mean, not me as a photographer, but a photography crew as well, and also capture VR. And not from like a behind the scenes kind of way, but more like I'll take the set and I will work with talent, whether I'm DP or director or DIT, whatever it may be, and actually get what we came there to do. And in this particular case, the client said, this is only our second VR project. And by the way, this is 360 content in this particular one. We didn't shoot this in 3D. We shot it on actually the Nokia Ozo.
Yeah,
so they didn't know what they wanted to do with this particular project when we shot it. So not only did we shoot it and present it, we also delivered in probably the best way we thought possible for their editors to start working and to do, because there's a state of discovery with that particular company and what they feel fashion VR and the high quality talent that they had with them to kind of generate
Yeah, well, let me go ahead and run the 360 piece. I mean, obviously it'll be in flat screen mode, but this will give you an idea, help folks have an idea of how you worked with the environment.
Well, in this particular case, with the environment, we had an amazing production design team. As you can tell, this is actually the 360. We shot this Nokia Ozo using the Motion Impossible rig, and I had a great team. Tommy Dingwell was our VR producer. John Calabrese was my VR tech, actually, and we just kind of developed, we wanted to get a good sense of the sets and everything that's going on. And we had ASAP Rocky, and that's what Zalando does, is they partner up with music video talent, music talent, and then we kind of played this little scene for them so that we could have as much of an immersive experience as we could, so people could look around and view and enjoy. Obviously, in this case, this is rectilinear and a very wide angle looking. It would be obviously a slightly different experience with the headset on. But yeah, we had a pretty good budget on this one. Shot over 3 days. So we got this actually in the first day, I believe, as you can see. So brands are really interested. They really want to make VR. They 360 as well, obviously, but there's still a learning process for them as well. And so technically, I'm not only trying to work with them to showcase and present, obviously, an excitement for the project and for the process of capture, which obviously these lovely people next to me try to promote as well. It's exciting, it's interesting. We want to make this, we want to show them and guide them through how to make the best project, because they're learning as well. And what I find the most interesting by far is we're now capturing everything all over again. The whole world, they say, photography, every shot's been shot. In this case, we get to be the lucky ones to re-photograph the world and experiences, and that's what probably excites me the most.
The things. Well, now we have a series of stills here that you have.
This is during prep.
Do you want me to hand this over to you, and
Sure.
you can do the green arrow to click your way through?
This is a different job, but on this one we shot with a jaunt, and a big thing for me was client. I wanted to be able to show the client what we were doing, and so back to our point earlier about testing, is we tested 4, 5, 6 rigs and said maybe this might be what we want. We ended up settling on the jaunt for what we wanted because of the turnaround we had. And so we had, this is us prepping. This is actually a screen capture of our stitch, and that's to check our stitch. It's a preview stitch, so it's not going to be highly accurate. And then this is actually a combination of two things. On your left is actually the Jaunt Media Manager, and you can see the Jaunt Media Manager actually is a smart system, smart camera, so it downloads everything, it reads every eye, and then puts it all into one hard drive, and then we take that information and we load it up into the Jaunt server, and it does a optical flow stitch for us, which is still pretty high quality 4K or UHD deliverable. And then here's some green screen that we did with that as well. This was a 3D 360 fully immersive content for Turtle Beach headphones, which are creating a multi-driver audio experience as well. So that was supposed to fold into that whole experience. Here's just kind of a glory shot. Here's my lovely DP right here is Mr. Josh Turner, who can't be here today, and all his lighting. I just worked as a VR supervisor tech to kind of put everything together. He's obviously 100% the lighting and really developing a lot of the look that we used. And then we put some of this into Scratch VR. This is actually on set of us testing the stitch again, and you can see all the crap we got everywhere. I don't know if they actually will play the whole thing, but all of that obviously in the end is gone.
on the things. So, Eve, one of the things when we were doing our conversations ahead of this, you were talking about layers in VR and how it's put together. And I was wondering if you would, kind of share a little bit of that, because it's an interesting way to sum it all up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I start out with when I work on any kind of 360 or VR project is finding out why we're shooting this in VR and what we're trying to achieve with that. And that coincides completely with, are we shooting this monoscopic 360? Is it 360 stereo? Is it another secondary layer, which I would say is then room scale? Is it volumetric? Is it have photogrammetry? How many different layers into the world of VR are we talking? Because I think it's a very general term that we're using. And once you add on another layer, there is infinitely more things that come along with that. And there's a very simple way to capture the story that you're trying to tell, and then there's a more complicated way. And if it's more complicated and that's the way you have to do it to tell the right story, then that's what becomes appropriate. It's just about knowing what that is ahead of time. And I kind of look at them as 3 different layers, and you're kind of adding it on. But they're not, none of them are the real version of VR to me. I think they're all a version of 360 storytelling and capturing the space. And like Dane was saying, really using that as a lens to see the world, and which lens are we going to see it through, and how much of that world do you want to immerse somebody inside of at any given time.
Well, while we're in kind of talking about going back to some of the technical things, how are crew positions in a VR shoot? How are they similar? How are they different from what everyone would be used to for flat screen production?
I try to keep it the same. I mean, for clarity, I think to go back to something Eve said a minute ago, everyone has kind of a different perspective on, in my experience, no matter what you're doing, any kind of production, everyone comes at it with a different set of experiences and how they've come to that project. And in the 2D space, it can kind of be all things to all people, because you can kind of shape it. Everyone sort of knows what to expect. A lot of this 360 stuff, people don't know what they're walking into, especially if it's a brand, or if there's a lot of education and a lot of, it's, and in a lot of cases, even for us, there's a new camera that we're using, or we're in a drone using it in a proximity we haven't been able to use before. And so, because, we're always trying to move the needle in different ways, I think there's sort of, as Dane said, there's sort of a process of discovery. So I think that the more we can kind of click into understood fixed constants, the better. And I think that, for the last 100 years, it's worked really well having, a first, an assistant, and an operator. So that's what I always try and do, is have a first, which is basically a VR tech, have a second that's supporting the first. You're not pulling focus in the same way necessarily. Sometimes you are, depending on how you're shooting. And then you have a DIT, who's sort of, sort of a loader that you'd say, but with all the more information of managing data, and sometimes we'll have to bring a second asset manager. I mean, something that we've dealt with a lot, because in a lot of these, high-res cinematic formats, there's so much data. A lot of times to do a transcode, we'll have an asset manager work overnight just so we don't have someone going to insane overtime. So I try to stick with the operator, then we'll have a rig tech if it's cable cam, or if it's, we're using a Mantis or Spherica or something. But I try to kind of click as best I can into those existing roles.
Yeah, and those things. Well, Eve, you had mentioned VR operator as a role on your shoots. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think I change my version of that every day of what that means. But right now, that means to me, similar to having somebody who is in charge of that camera, not necessarily from a creative standpoint per se, but from a very technical understanding of what it is that we have set up. They're there in prep so that all of the idiosyncrasies of that particular camera they're aware of, because some of these cameras are so new that they're going to have something funky going on with it that the one you shot on last week didn't have. So that operator is in charge of making sure that it has power, it has media, it can record, you're getting your live image, and they're assisting me with this post side of the brain. So I think there's a lot more, as a DP, we're used to production brain all the time. I'm thinking about editing a little bit, with the director as I'm going. And on a VR shoot, you have to think so much more about post. So I, for myself, like to have somebody else who can also share that post-heavy work with me. I work on a lot of projects that are not necessarily in controlled environments, and I don't necessarily get a full crew. So I don't usually have a VFX supervisor. I mean, there was one shoot that I got to do where I had a larger, more substantial crew with me, but most of the time I'm on location in places filming 360, and I need somebody else there that takes on a higher role than what I would say is a tech or assistant. And they really are the one that I'm gonna lean on and rely on when it comes to operating that VR setup.
Okay, great. As we're doing, actually, I'm getting ready to hand this over to you, Evan, because in our next thing, Evan has several different, whoops, did I?
You did the red button again.
I hit the red button again. All right. There you go. So, but Evan pulled pictures of several different rigs and things that he works with, and can talk a whole lot about camera choices and how that works into production. Here, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important things to go off of what Eve said is that there's no magic rig out there, and if there was, I'd be very happy. But in reality, in VR, the pace is very different than traditional. Some things take way less time, some things take way more time. And I think by and large, I try to pick the right rig for what it does the best. If we start from the left, that is a shot of a drone shot that was in Brazil, and we put it on an Omni. And one of the reasons for the Omni was, well, two reasons. We had two of them, so if the drone went down, we would have another camera for drone. And then secondly, because it's a very, when you have a limited time at certain locations to get this shot, which I think we did it in like an hour in total. And that camera in particular is a very fast-moving camera in terms of operation, changing settings and rolling, and you can really move that going while not taking away from your main A camera that's working the rest of the set. In the middle is the A7S Dark Corner 5 camera rig on a motion control slider put together by Hot Gears and original slider. That camera in particular, the reason we used that camera was later on that day at that location we were shooting night. And that's some of the fun things that we've been doing lately is night exterior in VR. And we really needed low light capabilities, and that camera is great for that. You can put it to a Teradek sphere and have a good live stitch. And to the left, or your right, is the S1, the Zcam S1. That camera is excellent. That project in particular was a Chevy project that we traveled around the world to do, and one of the most important things is that it was 360. It wasn't 360 VR live action. It was all about getting close to our subject, because when people are looking at it on a phone or on a computer, it's very important to have good proximity. Yeah. Let's see, up above was a commercial project, another Omni, because it's over water, and if we lost it, it was $5,000.
Chump change.
And then that is some night exterior work for a Facebook project, which is interesting. Balloon lights have become our friends again. We don't care about the sky generally, especially at night. And so now, as I say in VR, the lighting is either nothing or really big, and that's one of the ways. And then an Ozo in a vehicle. Mainly because of global shutter, and yeah.
Nice bongo job. Okay,
yeah,
there's the
yeah.
tricks right there, people.
Oh God.
I think one thing to jump in for a second to reiterate, which is really important for shooting anything, but especially for post in mind, is the fact that on these jobs you have a ton of different cameras for a ton of different applications. And so what ends up happening is, even though it's one camera, the Omnis can be 6 cameras, it can be 6 individuals, that means 6 chips. You're shooting Jaunt, that's 24 chips. We're doing this job we were talking about a little bit ago. We had 9 camera rigs, and we had 65 individual cameras. So that's why you have to have someone kind of dedicated to each rig. And yeah, you have 2 Omnis, but now that's 12 cameras. So and they're GoPros. So now you start like compounding issues, and it's about kind of, besides the data management end of it, there's also the camera management end of it. And when you're going to have, if you only have 1 Ozo, well, that's 1 piece of media. But if you have 2 Jaunts, now you got 48 cameras. I mean, it's 48 chips to manage. So it's scaled. And I think it's a real important thing to keep in mind because the data is no joke. It's getting bigger.
Yeah, and I think to speak off of the VR operator conversation, which I think we're all trying to figure out, for me, it's a VR supervisor who understands the difference between every rig and why we're using it and the strengths and weaknesses. And it's more about the camera technicians we have got 6 cards. We got to load 6 cards and format the 6 cards and get the media over to DIT. And we have all these different rigs that they're all handling, and they're rigging, and they're working with grip department, and they're working with art department, and they're trying to get everything worked out. And then you have an operator or a VR supervisor who's there placing the camera in the place and working with us, and us working with the director, trying to figure out how can we make this the best image possible. And it's just about taking some of the technical pieces off of our plate, basically. Oh yeah, and this is the fun stuff. That is a GoPro 3 camera rig with removed fronts and Intonai 220 lenses, and basically that is another camera that we don't really care if it gets busted, but it is the perspective of a hockey puck. And it's really the only thing that can get that close to the ice. Which the ground was eventually plated, which was a whole other nightmare. And then this is just the other Omni that can just get smashed against the boards.
But this is really good examples of using the exact right piece of gear for the right job. And sometimes it's tiny.
And the good thing about this guy, too, is it fits into a carry-on really well. More A7.
And you also see how important it is to look good on set, too. Gotta look good. Gotta look good. They gotta know that you are leading the way.
Thanks to Dane, those set photos look great.
One of the things that we don't have up here yet, and it's a whole entirely new realm of photography, but volumetric capture. And how is volumetric capture, how does that promise to change and integrate into the 360 video environment?
This is something we use. This is a big thing. I think this is what we'll be talking about at Next VR LA, about all of our bunch of set photos of Evan in a scarf from those jobs. It's a big deal. It's a big deal because what's sort of coming is the idea of this using laser scanning, which we've been using a little bit, and the integration of how shooting photogrammetry gets married with that data, and what we kind of do with point clouds. And as the volumetric capture becomes a little more mobile, right now it's pretty studio based, although that's changing. So but again, a ton of data. You look at shooting with Lytro, it's petabytes. It's a ton of data, and I think that's kind of the big thing that people aren't talking about or will be talking about in the near future is like how data and how streaming happens. Because as we're, one of the biggest things that happened over the course of from last VRLA to this VRLA is probably monitoring, like we were talking about before. It was always a thing. It's important for the director to see what we're doing. It's important for us to verify the cameras are rolling. Like we need to see what's going on, and now that we can see that, we're streaming. And when we're shooting, something at a sporting event, or where there's an insane amount of RF that we're having all this interference, like streaming and data are 2 big deals.
Bandwidth. It's a big deal for us. The one things we're doing now, and just to hop off a little bit off Andrew's comment, is, before we were doing Andrew brought me on my first VR job, and I was totally overwhelmed and absolutely nuts. But we had 16 individual images that we tried to put on a screen to kind of make it look like it was all somewhat stitched together. And now, on the live events at least, we're now transmitting a stitched image directly to clients, directors, multiple people at once to be able to view what we're shooting so we can all have that conversation. So makeup and hair, as well as the director and producer and other crew members can look at stuff and make decisions and improve. As before, they looked at something, said, okay, this is great. And then maybe if you're lucky, you might play it back, local 95 member would play it back for us. And we look at it and say, okay, that's good. We like that. Move on. Or no, let's have another take because of X. So, I mean, the technology, I'm almost changing my story about every 3 to 5 weeks. So whatever I say now, it doesn't matter at all 5 weeks from now. So it's just that's how quickly things are evolving, getting better, but volumetric's one of those things. And now that's a huge part of our vocabulary as cinematographers. Before we understood, but now we're having to help accomplish, work with partners, a lot of exciting stuff. I'm sure some of you folks have been able to see some of it from 8i or Hype VR. If you get a chance, go check that out.
Since we were talking about differences between last year and this year, one of the things, now that we're 3 years into VR shooting, one of the big topics, and it was even a huge topic last year, was moving the camera, and the other big topic was directing the viewer's attention within a 360 video experience. What have we learned about that now that we're 3 years into it? Because it's changed.
Well, I think everyone's gotten a little more accepting of trying not to just put rules down and say that you can or can't do something. There's been a lot of things that you can do, and I think, again, sometimes breaking the rules and making somebody feel a certain way that maybe for another project that's not going to feel right. You certainly want that movement. You want to play with what that's going to do for somebody. That I don't know that it's so much of what have we learned for me, but more of what are we now accepting and kind of what are we letting everyone get away with. And I think we're still exploring so many different things, and almost on every project I find myself doing something that's new that I haven't tried before, and I don't know that that's going to work, but I don't know that we're at a point. I think last year was like a lot of what can we do, what can't we do, and where's the line, and oh, I can't put somebody here, I can put someone here. I feel like it's gotten a little bit more flexible of trying not to just throw down rules.
I have to say that in terms of rules, and every single job is something completely new. We're shooting with a new camera, we're shooting with a new technology, whatever it is, it's all, and that's true of not just VR stuff. I mean, that's true in traditional stuff too. We're adding motion capture. I think we're all kind of driving to a place where things are always different. Like I've never had a director say, is there a camera out there that works and has worked for 150 years? Like that just doesn't happen. It's always about kind of like, what's the new thing? What's the latest? That interests me. I get excited about that. It's about kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't. But I think it's always a learning experience. I think the big thing that's changed to my eye is that there's a fluency and a bunch of examples, good and bad. And so you can say, well, go see a bunch of stuff and then let's talk about it. And we like how this worked, or we like how, no, we can do this better, and this we can stabilize. This we can stabilize on the day, this we can stabilize in post, or this we're going to do volumetrically. And so you can kind of cite examples, so there's maybe a better fluency or an understanding on the kind of overall than there was before.
Yeah, so what you're saying, there's starting to be a bit more of a vernacular within VR, that there's starting to be points of reference so that these creative conversations can happen, not in a complete abstract sense. It's no longer totally theory.
I think by the nature of all of us up here, we're very fearless, and we're not afraid of looking off the cliff. And I think now it's a little easier because we can look off the cliff and say, hey, they jumped and they were fine. So, hey, look at this. So, I mean, it's not about getting crazy, but it's about what can we do to push it forward.
Those things. So we're already drawing close on time. Let's try a question or two from the audience. Let's hear. You were first.
Yes, the answer to your question, yes, we can with Ozo was kind of the first, Nokia was the first company that kind of did that with, that I did that with. Got a great guy, Ezra Fine, he's in here somewhere. He kind of brought a system and we were able to kind of test that, but really it's not real time, but it's really close. We have really dirty stitch programs, but they're really low quality and they're just kind of somewhat reference.
I do all on set. Like every job I've ever done, I do on set, even if it's a temp stitch. But I can't. I don't want to leave a location if I don't know at least some sort of understanding of what we shot. I mean, right now that's just the technology. It's like I fight for that every single day.
But you're probably not delivering what you've stitched on the day, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, just even if we do an AVP stitch on set, it may still go through Nuke to get actually stitched. But still, I know with AVP, I'm going to get 90% of the way there and know that, okay, we did it right.
And that's the Autopado video player is what he's referring to, AVP.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, let's...
Hi, thank you so much for putting this together. I'm a new compositor. I've been in VR for, if not 3 years, 2.5. I love the fact that you say that you don't leave a set without having seen a stitch and understanding that if what you're seeing on set is not 100% there, it has the potential to get there. I guess the biggest challenge for me is, and I see this, I don't see this in one place. I see this in so many places, is, the disconnect between production and post-production. It's just the single place where studios could get most bang for their buck, return on their investment, is improving that communication. And it's, I started as a camera assistant and, in a rental company. And so I have that, right? I wish we had, upside down day and, the people on set would stitch and the people that stitch would go on set and frame and do these things, right? Because we felt the pain and we understand that we could get the story in the can, right? We can tell the story with conservative shots, get creative, knowing that we have the story with safe shots, right? And it'll be done in a timely, humane manner, not in a, in a crazy way. So I guess my question would be how to, because it seems like you all have great relationships with your post-production, people. How do you improve that? How do you?
Communication.
Well, you also just
Hands
bring
down.
them in as early as, like, we were talking about conversations before and when do these all start? They're at the beginning. Like you don't go out and film anything without the entire post-production team, especially your VFX supervisor and your VR supervisor, which are two, I think, different roles that are both very essential to have at the beginning of the conversations. You just bring them in at the beginning.
Ever. I mean, I don't go anywhere without a visual effects supervisor, period. No matter who it is. And it's not always the same guy, but that's
Or
like
girl.
a must-have.
He has vacation pictures to prove that.
Yeah. Go ahead and run it, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, all of us up here know how to stitch, and that's not necessarily going to continue as this grows, but I think when you know how to stitch and how difficult it is and how to actually do it, you know how important the job is, and it's not like traditional filmmaking where you just shoot it and you're like, somebody will figure it out. It's like you know how difficult it is, and so it's only for our work to get better to have communication with post.
I turned down a job that didn't have a post supervisor on it. That were like,
Visual
turned it
effects.
down.
I've been in agency conversations where I had an incredible VR tech, VR supervisor with me on a conversation with agency saying, hi, we're going to go with this post-production house. They haven't shot anything in VR ever, but they've done 180 projects with us, so we're going to go with them. And I said, well, I'm not sure. I don't know. Okay, well, that's fine. And I said, okay, great. I go out, I test, I shoot, I deliver all the media, I upload it, give it to them. And then we sit there in a conversation. We're going over everything, look at all of it, and I look at the stitch. It's terrible. It's like a square building is not even like lining up. A tree is like in two parts. And I turn to my crew member and I say, and I look at him, and literally the 2 minutes that we're having that conversation from when we look at that image, he turns and says, here, this is actually how it should look. And it totally shut down everything the post-production, or the company that was proposing it did. And so now they were open to receiving information from us once we kind of said, hey, we kind of know what we're doing. But do I stitch every time on every job? Mostly. Live stitch is a really important thing that we're trying to get better at. So now we can just shoot, live stitch the cameras, and deliver a project directly to editorial so that we can skip this project. Some of the early projects that Andrew and I did take me 3 days. 3 days to deliver just the footage to post to get to.
Okay, so we have time for one more question.
He actually asked, he raised his hand like first.
Okay.
This has been a great panel. I'm just recently getting into VR production, and I've found a lot of conversations end with "not yet." And I'm curious to hear from your guys' perspectives what each of you would like to be in the future doing. What would make your job easier in this instance? Because obviously, in traditional filmmaking, the example that was shown of the fashion thing that you had done, Dane, that VR bit was a lot longer. It was like a long take because you have to do that, but I'm sure it took a lot more visual effects. Whereas the super fast cutty, 2D version, had a different feel. What's the next step for each one of you? I'd love to hear sort of what is not yet right now, but what you'd like to see.
I'll go really quick. I want more control over certain cameras. I want to be able to do certain things that I can't do with them yet, just from elements of controlling shutter on certain cameras that you can't, and even exposure on certain things, and better monitoring setups. And we talked a lot about live stitching, and live stitching is actually a preview stitch is part of this new element of DIT work that's like, I don't even know. Like,
it just
there's,
constantly evolves.
it's just, so I think better just fluency with that and workflow from that standpoint, and being able to monitor certain elements that I just can't yet.
I end up consulting on some stuff and on rig related stuff, and I find that in those early conversations, a lot of times they're not consulting the people that are using the gear at any level. I mean, even talking about software and hardware. And on the camera side, a lot of times you use a new piece of equipment, you're sort of like, well, that doesn't make any sense. This thing's it's a market. They've launched it at CES and at NAB and at IBC, and it's come out and it's launched. But who's using this thing? I can't adjust shutter, or there's like some basic thing that I can't do. And so I think it's about kind of establishing as part of the protocol when stuff gets launched to speak to the end users.
I think it kind of goes along to what both of you guys just said. I mean, for sure, it's all about the same tools for exposure and framing that we have in current flat screen capture. All of those tools, exposure tools, framing tools, that, as well as the most important, I think, is reliability. A lot of this stuff we use is because of it's either prosumer materials or it's some sort of rig that's been put together of other things to create a VR camera. For me, I'm looking for reliability. But I think looking forward, I think one of the things that I'm really sort of excited about is the ability to put the camera in more places and not have to bring so many different rigs. And I have a camera that, just as Andrew says, that the manufacturers sent out to people that actually use it. There's really a handful of regular cinema cameras out there, and it's been many, many years of testing and feedback that created those cameras, and now we have to do this in a couple of years and figure it out.
Go ahead,
The one from a DIT perspective, the biggest thing really for me is being able to help the cinematographer out more, especially with creating the look. I mean, when I'm on set, when I'm working in a 2D space, I'm really involved in the look. The exposure is obviously one. The color, how we're doing that, skin tone. I mean, just we have multiple actors and how we want to make them look the best they can look possible, or the performance. Those are some things that we're still kind of trying to figure out, because as of right now, you shoot it, and then it has to go through this lengthy post process, and then we get to color it, as opposed to you shoot it, maybe you get a stitch still that you kind of can color. I mean, Andrew and Evan and Eve all have like their process for that as well, but there's nothing unified yet that I can say all four of us could do the project on X software and it will translate.
I just wanted to throw one last thought about there on that topic, is that I think that one of the important things as the business starts to go more volumetric, as interactive becomes a thing, as appetites for audiences want to be more interactive and move around, keeping the artistry involved, because I think that the shame would be to lose that. With the last 100 years, we've really refined nuance and storytelling and what happens in a frame, whether that's texture on a wall, or that's how something's lit, or that's how the actor is performing. And as the technology becomes a little more kind of post-driven, whether it's volumetric capture or photogrammetry or whatever that other kind of, if it's entirely a game engine built thing, I think it's just about kind of keeping the nuance that we've been able to imbue, and hire your local cinematographer.
There you go. And
Local 600 cinematographer, just to be clear about that. International too.
yeah, so on that note, we will, thank you. And
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all you guys coming out here and listening to us speak. We'll be outside. If any of you guys have a question or didn't get to ask, please do. And we look forward to seeing all you guys in the future.